Hello and welcome everyone to the Meeta and Tosh show. Tosh and I are doing the Q&A sessions back every Thursday at 11 a.m. And today, Tosh, it's really good to have you back because you chose today's topic, didn't you?
I did. Hi, Meeta. Morning, by the way. Yeah, you know what? It was just something that a number of clients have come up with recently. It seems to be fairly relevant. It's always relevant for people, quite frankly. And if you know what this is about, then it's good to have a refresher. And if you don't, it's really good to pick our brains and address the situation that could be a real nightmare if not handled properly.
Yes, well, we specifically mentioned Alice Thompson and her case that came to light to the public sort of about 10 days ago, where she was awarded 185k because she wasn't allowed to leave before 5, and therefore it was a discrimination award. Is that right?
Yeah. Absolutely. I wanted to talk about two cases today. That's one of them. Another one was about a job advert that was put out, which you didn't think would happen in this day and age. So I was going to go through those two scenarios with you all before we go into our questions for today, because I think by going through the story, maybe people will be able to apply it to situations that they're facing, and it has a more grounded application, perhaps.
Indeed, a practical application of what we often know are the laws and the rights and the processes on paper. But, I'm sure, God, in this day and age, I'm sure no employer goes into a conversation or a maternity process plan with a view to being being sued for nearly £200,000. And I have to say, when I read that, I did a mental review of my last 25 years in business and thought, God, have I been through anything like this? Have I had people that, so I bet every employer, and this is a really popular topic today, we've had people saying, actually, I can't make it, but please send us the recording, please sign me up for the notes. It's huge. And somebody mentioned that, it feels like there's a lot of maternity going on, but you just said it's going on anyway. I mean, it's part of, and thank God.
Maybe with lockdown, other bits and pieces, people have had a little baby boom or something. But, one of the things you just said there about intention, most people, I have to assume, are good. Yeah. Most people do not think I'm going to treat you badly because I'm racist. Yeah. Or because I don't like you because you're having a baby. They're thinking about it maybe from a work perspective. Oh, this is going to be difficult. Yeah. And maybe it just comes out in a slightly different way. But intention, this isn't necessarily required for there to be a claim, which is what's going to happen when we start talking about this Alice Thompson case.
Okay. So, I love a stat. I love a stat, Tosh. And apparently 42% of women feel that attitudes change towards them when they announce that they're pregnant. Like, wow, that is shocking.
It is. And a lot of employers don't know how to handle it, Meeta, as well.
Are you being too careful? Are you not giving them enough support? Are they feeling singled out because they're pregnant? Are you checking in too much? Are you not checking in enough? There was a comment about...
Yeah, that's really right.
There was a comment about pregger's brain or baby brain. And I've, spoken about it for myself and members of the team who are pregnant. It's not a negative thing. It's just a fact, But
everything's a context, isn't it? You say it as somebody that has experienced having a baby, and you'll be all right. If I say it to a member of my staff as having a baby, or you've got baby brain, haven't you? Well, it can be taken in a different way because the context is completely different.
And Tosh, you and I seem to always come back to trust, confidence, clarity of communication, and having aligned cultures, which then overcome misunderstandings. Because I'm sure that for every lawsuit that's paid out, there's an employer saying, I didn't mean for that to be the way it was proved.
And you know what else I would really like as a takeaway for anybody watching this is you don't need to tread on eggshells. As soon as somebody, they're pregnant, we better be careful. No, you just don't do anything that's negative because of the pregnancy. Yeah. You can do something negative because of another reason, as long as it's not discriminatory. So just be clear what your motives are and what you're doing and why, and we'll go through that. I really want people to feel, it's not just about employee rights. I know I've said this a lot. It's about employer rights as well. You also have rights.
Absolutely. And it's the balance of getting that process right. And that's why our poll today is covering what your biggest maternity challenges are around there. So first of all, understanding your rights as an employer, understanding their rights, women who are pregnant or talking about coming back to work, how you manage that. So we've also got handling flexible working requests, and we've also got finding maternity cover, which hasn't yet had a vote. So hopefully that means that there's good processes internally to cover people, but understanding employees' rights has so far hit the biggest score with 66%, with understanding your rights and handling flexible working requests equal at 16%. So what do you make of that, Tosh?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It's just because people just don't, I bet they do. I bet a lot of you already know what the rights are, but maybe there's some specifics that aren't clear. You know, what happens is nobody looks it up until somebody comes and says, I'm pregnant. Then everyone panics and starts looking everything up or talks to somebody like me. So look, I'm going to step by step flesh these things out. But, you know, rather than us giving you a lecture on it all, put down specific questions in the chat. You know the way this works. You know, what I promise you is we answer every single question that you put in the chat today. You know, really grill us, so that there's a specific situation we can address for you during this live webinar. We'll do it. If we need to take it offline, that again is something Meeta and I always are happy to do. And some people have taken us up on that. There's no catch. You know, just give us a call and we'll take it offline and figure out a solution that way. Okay. So
absolutely. Including following us on LinkedIn, because we often post thought pieces and information on there. And you can even text us. We're good on the old WhatsApp, aren't we, Tosh? So
the old WhatsApp.
The next 30 minutes, we try to keep the sessions no more than 40 minutes. We know how precious everyone's time is, but you should be able to have takeaways that you can apply immediately back in your business. And I have to say, Tosh, this case was a bit of a shock, because I you know, as you said, you can be, what were your words? You can be discriminatory because of other reasons, but not because they're pregnant. Did you say that? What did you say?
No, I said you can do whatever you like with respect to an employee, as long as it doesn't fall within one of the 9 protected characteristics.
Yeah.
So just because they're pregnant doesn't mean you can't treat them badly. I'm not asking you to treat them badly. You might treat them less favorably because they're not performing, perhaps, as long as it isn't connected to the pregnancy, or as long as it isn't connected to race, sex, religion, you know, sexual orientation, gender reassignment, you know, all the colours of the rainbow, so to speak.
Well, it's interesting about this 5 o'clock finish, and I'm looking forward to hearing how this all went so wrong for the employer, because so many people who are now on maternity don't want to come back to the office full time, or they want to do condensed hours, they want to do job shares. And employers are already catching up with so much from, you know, lockdown, now hybrid working, going back to the office. So this could easily happen to anyone, couldn't it?
Absolutely. And you know what it is? It's the knee-jerk reaction is where people are going to trip up.
Okay.
That can't work. We can never work that way. Well, I want you to think about it in the same way as the pandemic. You can't work from home. We have to work from home, you know, and because you adapt to make the situation good. It's like having kids, you know, we're not ready for a kid. Oh, we've got a kid. Guess what? We're going to adapt, because that's the way it works. You know, lots of mothers would understand that, or parents will understand that, and employers definitely understand that with the pandemic. You adapt.
Yeah. I'm going through that with a puppy now, Tosh, so it never stops.
You got a puppy, have you? Or you don't adapt, by the way. If you can't reasonably adapt, then you don't, in the flexible working scenario that we're going to end up talking about, okay?
Well, should we talk about Alice Thompson's case? Because that was or do you want to talk about the advertisement first?
What I'll do is I'll do both. Let's start off with the advertisement.
Okay.
Because I think that isn't really that's more to do with discriminatory advertisements for roles.
Yeah. Whereas
the Alice Thompson is on all fours with what it is that we're discussing today as well. I just started chucking the football club one because it was just an interesting case. So what this was an advert. If I'm looking down, I'm looking at my notes here, okay?
Right.
It was an advert that was placed by the Lancashire Football Club. And what it said was that there was no need to apply if you wanted a work-life balance. So this is what the actual advert said. It said, this is a hands-on role and requires hands-on leadership from the front. So delegators and office dwellers, please don't apply. If not already apparent, we are not a Premiership club, and therefore every penny and every fan has to be fought for and respected. You will need to be proactive in your approach to everything. And then it adds, we work hard at Flied, which is the name of the is the name of the football club.
Yeah.
So again, don't apply if you're looking for a work-life balance or have to pick up the kids from school twice a week at 3:30 p.m. So what do you think of that?
Yeah, I think it's pretty short-sighted. I think everything was fine until the last sentence.
Yeah, I mean, it's okay, you know, maybe the work really is that bad if they can show that, but to literally just put a block on without even considering why something may or may not work is indirectly discriminatory. It came up, nobody did them yet, by the way. It was just something that was flagged up and came under a lot of criticism. Right. So they updated their advert, and guess what they updated it to? It says this, you will need to be proactive in your approach to everything. For the avoidance of a doubt, we work hard at Filed. So again, don't apply if you're looking for flexi time or similar work-life balances. I mean, it's literally no improvement. So I don't know. It's an HR nightmare from their perspective, and it's just so, I don't know, 1971. We're in 2021 now. It's crazy that you would be seeing adverts like that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And while we're on the subject of adverts, as a partner to employers for finding great people, we talk about language and the power of language on perception of that organization. So even words like dynamic and energetic, all of these words are seen as discriminatory. So, I mean,
it might sound ageist, right? Maybe the assumption is that somebody who's older might not have the energy. It's that level of but insight you need to have when you're making the application. What is it you're looking for?
Yeah. So does that mean we're going to get to a point where if somebody says only people who want to do 5 days a week full-time need apply? Because that's essentially what they're saying. They just haven't worded it very professionally. This is a full-time role. And I think we're having...
the reality might be... So there's a slight delay. Meeta. I don't know if it's my end or your end. So forgive me if I'm talking over a little bit. But you're right. I'm not saying that can't be the reality of the situation, but to say that up front is already discriminatory. That's just not gonna work. You can't just put that out there without there being potential consequences. And let's not forget, you don't have to be an employee of an employer to sue. You could sue for indirect discrimination being a candidate, not even had the job yet. And the compensatory awards are actually unlimited for discrimination, which is what's happened in the next case that we're going to go through.
Yeah, that was the scary thing about adverts, is people who want to apply but are prevented from applying because of language or specifics from employer adverts can sue. So people can sue just reading your advert. People can sue for how they're made to feel in an interview. Obviously, they can sue as people do when they're in work or have been let go. Right. But the fact that as an employer, you could be sued by somebody you've never heard of and it's unlimited damages, that's huge. And I
totally agree. And so I just want to ask anybody watching this, I wonder if you can see whether it's Meeta's screen or my screen that's a bit fuzzy or slowing things down a bit. I'm just not sure whose connection it is. If you could just put something in the chat, that would be very grateful.
Indeed, I know that Virgin Media were doing some work in my world yesterday, but I got a text telling me it's all good today. We've got very quiet people on the webinar today. Hopefully, that means everyone is doing okay.
Yeah, I mean, put it in the chat if you can hear us. Okay, just want to make sure. Oh, it's me. All right, thanks, Kate. Sorry, my apologies. Hopefully, even though it's a bit slow, I am coming through though. Is that right? You're hearing what I'm saying?
Hopefully, we'll take
I'll wait for a yes. Okay, cool.
All right.
So let us go on to the second case, Meeta. So this is the one that's quite interesting, and it relates to a mother who was refused a 5 p.m. finish, and she was awarded £185,000, right? And her normal finishing time was 6 p.m., just to put that in a context.
Yeah.
So and what the tribunal ruled was that she suffered indirect discrimination when they refused to consider her flexible working request. So for those that don't know, just very quickly, direct discrimination on the grounds of sex would be, I'm treating you badly because you're a woman. Indirect discrimination means I'm putting some sort of criteria or provision or practice in place which will indirectly discriminate against the majority of women than as opposed to anybody else, is the idea, right? In the old days, it might have been when they were recruiting for police officers. They used to have a height restriction. So you can probably imagine, apart from people like myself who are, let's say, I'm vertically challenged, the majority of women would be shorter. So they would be indirectly discriminated against, as an example.
Yeah.
So this lady, Alice Thompson, she wanted to work shorter hours to pick up her daughter from nursery, but she ended up resigning. So she was a successful sales manager and an independent estate agent, and then she became pregnant back in 2018. So the case has been going on for quite a bit.
Okay.
When she returned to work after maternity leave, she wanted to work from 5 o'clock until 6 o'clock, and the employer just didn't even give it any real consideration whatsoever. So they gave her, the tribunal awarded her £185,000 for a failure to consider a flexible working request. So we don't even know if it was doable or not. They failed to consider it. And the consequence was that £185,000 comprised of a loss of earnings, loss of pension, injury to feelings, which is the award for discrimination, and also interest as well. But it's also worth noting, just as a final point on that there were other claims that she made, which included discrimination due to pregnancy and maternity leave and harassment, and the tribunal did not find in her favour on those things. So it was about a flexible working request.
And the shock of that is it wasn't even that they said no, it's that they didn't do the process to consider it and give her relevant reasons why not.
Correct. They just didn't take her request seriously.
You have to. The law is that you have to consider flexible working requests. So
correct. And every employee, and that means doesn't have to be because of pregnancy, by the way, you just have to be employed for at least 26 weeks.
Right.
Every employee has the right to make a flexible working request once a year, one time only, right?
Okay.
There's not even, believe it or not, a right of appeal unless that's in your contract. The law doesn't allow for a right of appeal. And if they put it in writing, you have to reasonably consider it, and you have to reasonably consider and confirm a decision within 3 months of the request being made.
So they had 3 months to consider it, but because they literally dismissed it, she was awarded 185K. Now, my understanding is that she was on a 6-figure salary, which means that the rest of it was probably, 65, 35. So 65 would have been covering the salary. And usually when people are awarded, when they cover earnings, is it loss of income? Is that why it was that high?
Correct. So loss of income, if it would be, there's different elements. She's resigned, so she would have claimed constructive dismissal as well. That would have been capped at up to £90,000. And on top of that, there would have been the injury to feelings award. There's 3 different bands. The top band is 45.5. But if you can show that you've been discriminated against, and as a result of that discrimination, you can't get another job, well, then loss of earnings can go on for as long as the tribunal decides is fair and reasonable. And I suspect that's kind of what's happened here.
Yeah. So
the reality is she wanted an hour less. So they would have to really show, it's very difficult to understand any job where there would be 1 hour less, unless it's necessary. So, for example, I have a client who has a doctor's surgery, and the employee wanted to reduce their hours by 2 hours. The problem was that they have opening and closing times for the surgery, and for whatever reason, with the way that COVID is at the moment, they need somebody to physically lock the door at that time, and they weren't able to accommodate that. So you have reasons, and there are 8 reasons where you can reasonably refuse a flexible working request. Do most people know that already, or do you want to address that now?
I think it's worth addressing, Tosh. Why, let's refresh all of our memories on that.
So there's 8 reasons you can refuse a flexible working request. These are just headings. Obviously, everything's going to be fact sensitive, right? So the first thing is the burden of additional costs. So if accommodate that person is going to be just too much cost, unreasonably so, that doesn't mean it can't cost anything. And the way you decide that is the size and the administrative resources of the company. Well, then that's a reason to say no. And it doesn't have to be, it can be one or more of these reasons, right? The second reason is inability to reorganize your work amongst the existing staff. So full-time wants to go part-time, we can't cover the days they don't want to work anymore with the existing staff. Number 3 is inability to recruit additional staff. So obviously, if we can't get somebody to cover the gap, that would also be a relevant reason to say no. Number 4 is a detrimental impact on quality. So if the nature of your work means that reducing the hours or working the hours in the way that the employee wants to work is really going to significantly impact on the way that you operate, well, then that can be a reason to say no. Number 5 is a detrimental impact on performance. Kind of might be this one is related to obviously the impact on the client, and this one might be how it relates to the business. Number 6 is the detrimental effect on ability to meet customer demand. That's obviously going to be a key one. Number 7 is insufficient work for the periods that the employee wants to work.
Right.
So they want to work Mondays and Tuesdays, and your business days are Wednesday, Thursday, Fridays, for example. And the last thing might be you have to refuse their flexible working request because of planned structural changes. So then maybe there are some redundancies taking place, or you're reorganizing the way that you're working, or what have you. Those will be legitimate reasons to say no. I'd be interested to know what kind of requests or what kind of challenges anybody watching this has been facing, if you put it in the chat, so we can address that directly for you.
Yeah, that would be good, because very often employers say it's the financial burden of either not being able to replace the person or find someone to do job shares, for example. What about an employer that says, well, if you want to reduce your hours by a certain number of hours, we'll adjust the basic. Is that discriminatory? That seems like a sensible business solution.
Yeah, you can do absolutely. Look, adjusting the hours, it might be forgotten by a lot of employees and maybe even employers. If they reduce your hours, you reduce everything else proportionately. Holiday entitlement, salary. They don't get the same full pay at reduced hours. It doesn't work that way.
So this lady could have potentially been offering to do the hours at another time, or she could have been offering to do them remotely, or she could have been offering to take a pay cut. We just don't know.
Well, we can't do that. One of the things that she was upset was, well, look, why can't, instead of working 9 to 6, why can't I work 8 to 5?
Yeah.
There was clearly no reason that couldn't have been done. They just thought it couldn't be accommodated. That 1 hour cost them £185,000. That's a small estate agent, an independent estate agent, and that's not peanuts for even a big company. So, it's so easy to get wrong by making assumptions rather than, knowing the right thing to do.
That's why it's good having you in our world, Tosh, because you always say you can do, the law doesn't tell you what not to do. It tells you what the consequences are if you do something. And, you're all about forearming employers with the right knowledge, tools and support to then never get into this scenario.
Exactly right. And Meeta, if you listen to what I'm saying and what you're saying, anybody who's hearing me, forget the law. I know that sounds a ridiculous thing for a lawyer to say. I love that sentence. Forget the law. We're just talking about using your common sense and being reasonable about what works or doesn't work. Yeah. You can think, can this work for us? Okay, why doesn't it work for us? Because of these reasons. Okay, does it fall within one of the 8 categories that will allow us to say no? You can Google that if you didn't remember what I'd said or written it down. Yeah. And that's a logical, right way to do it. Not, oh no, I can't work like that. I won't even think about it. It's that rushed mindset that's going to cause you problems.
And closed mindset. We talk about growth mindset versus closed mindset. And this is all about employers who want to retain their talent and retain their people in their world. And my understanding is that she was really good at what she did. And, it's a shame from so many sides, and it can be avoided so easily. So it's interesting, isn't it? Because actually we were talking about rights, and the poll currently shows that understanding employee rights is still up there at 55%. The next most popular answer is handling flexible working requests, which is what we're talking about now. And then third is understanding your rights as an employer. And Tosh, what I would ask you is, for employers, actually we're thinking about the support of our workforce, not just women. There's paternity cover and maternity cover. There's now flexible working rights for people who are taking care of the elderly. Actually, anyone, as you said, can apply for flexible working. But it's about, as an organisation, at what point you set your stake in the sand for who you are, what you stand for. How much does an employer have to have as black and white in a handbook or in their induction, and how much of it can be done on a case-by-case basis?
So the case-by-case basis is always going to be the case, right? Because you're only going to have principles in a handbook. We will reasonably consider your request because we don't know what each individual request is. Remember, you can make a flexible request because you feel like it, not because there's a child to look after or because of anything that's really difficult. I just don't feel like it. You know what? I just decided I want to work 1 day a week. Yeah. So the process is exactly the same. And the process is the flexible working request must be made in writing is number one. When you put it in writing, that's your one-time request. So if I put it in writing and I ask for I'd like to reduce Monday to Friday to Monday to Tuesday and Wednesday, and you say, and we say no, and they say, well, okay, how about if we change the days? Can I do it to Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday instead? Well, if the employer wants to be quite tough about it, they can say you've already got one request. I'm afraid that's a no. Obviously, that might have other implications like constructive dismissal about fairness and reasonable, but purely for flexible working purposes. Yeah. If it's reasonable to say no, it's reasonable to say no. And they only get to us once a year.
Okay. We've gone a little fuzzy again, Tosh, so apologies if I spoke over you. But I feel that with us having spoken about these adverts and how they can create a claim, speaking about Alice and how her approach and the employer's approach to just not even consider. So is it right that they just said no, they didn't put it in writing the whys? Is that the fundamentals of what was missing?
Yeah, correct. They didn't reasonably consider it. Right. The requirements for the employers to reasonably consider it. I said, forget the law. you know what reasonable is. It's what we can justify in the circumstances. So they failed to do that, and that is why they ended up in that hole.
Yeah, it's just shocking to imagine that there's an organisation that would, you know, do that in this day and age, but it happens. And as I said, thinking, you know, looking at that stat of 42% of pregnant women say that they're discriminated against or attitudes change, a lot of people do it without realising. So
yes,
let's talk about specifically maternity and pregnancy discrimination and things around rights, because I think this is where employers, again, I know for a fact that I will never go into when somebody tells us that they're expecting. And actually, you know, Tosh, now I am starting to coach females in my network around egg freezing. And so actually maternity or reproductive health and fertility is starting earlier and earlier. And actually, yes, this world is going to become even more and more complex. I know for a fact, you know, my employers gave me support when I did IVF, and not everything is a right. So we're going to talk about rights versus a would be nice, or what employers do as the over and above. But it is something that employers should be thinking about, because again, it says a lot about who they are, how they attract and then retain people. And, you know, it's all very well finding the right people, but retaining them is where you get the real return.
Yes, you're spot on. It's understanding there's a balance between what the minimum requirements are for law and what it is you want to do as an employer and what you want to stand for, what you want to be known for. But, you know, if the number one issue that seems to be rising from the poll is understanding or knowledge about what your rights are, what the employee's rights are, let's do it. Let's go through it.
Perfect. What I'd love to touch on before we start the actual law is examples of pregnancy discrimination. So this is somebody who falls pregnant and the reasons why they might be discriminated against. So, for example, if they're pregnant, but then their contract isn't extended during or after probation, that could be seen as discrimination.
Yes.
Selected for redundancy because of pregnancy.
Certainly.
Dismissed because of pregnancy or a non-renewal of a fixed-term contract. So again, you know, we were asked this question last week, I believe, and it wasn't to do with pregnancy. It was to do with vaccines and coming into the office and someone who refused to get vaccinated, and someone said, can I not extend the fixed term contract because they're now refusing to get a vaccine? And at the moment, that's not discriminatory, is it?
No, as long as it's not connected to a reason that's religion or pregnancy, for example, might be two reasons that they're doing. You're absolutely right. It could relate to other things, you know. It could relate to things like promotional opportunities. We're not, you know what, so and so is going off on maternity leave. We're not going to give her that opportunity to promotion. It might be a work do. You know, one of the things in this Alice Thompson case was when she got pregnant, they went on a work trip, and on the work trip, everybody else went out for a jolly on a boat. The employer spent 25 grand on this jolly, and she didn't. She chose to go shopping instead. And they didn't find that was harassment. She felt excluded, but the employer was able to show they did everything to try and include her. Their failing was only in the flexible working request, not in the other ways that they were treating her. So it could be anything. If you're treating, the principle is that person being treated that way because of the pregnancy? Is it connected to that in any way? If the answer is yes, well, that's what you're looking at.
Yeah, and it's not just promotion or team events. It's also even training or considering them for another role in the organisation. So reduction in pay or hours. So if that's enforced by the employer, that could be seen as pregnancy discrimination. Pressuring them to resign.
Yes.
God. And failing to remove risks at
work.
For
sure.
And taking action to protect an employee's health and safety during pregnancy. Failing to do that could also be seen as pregnancy discrimination, because if there's a reason they can't come to work and safely, and I've said to one of my team who's due in a couple of months, you know, if you're not comfortable getting on the train, work from home, you know, because that's been our decision, but it's got to be clearly and fairly applied depending on the circumstances at the time.
Another analogy I'd like to give you is it's a little bit like, you know, it depends what kind of approach you have to these sorts of things. But, you know, if you're like a family in your business, everybody's got each other's back, you're going to be more caring, probably provide more, accommodate things a lot more, because you'll go beyond what your legal requirements are. If you're a company that operates like an Olympic sports performance team, well, guess what happens when the top performers aren't performing anymore?
Yeah.
There's no discussion about making adjustments. They're not there anymore. We get the next person that's in there. Yeah. So if I look at that in a very hard way, if the employer is able to show that it doesn't work, that flexible working request, because it hits one of the 8 reasons to refuse, well, that's okay. You just need to be very clear why it is, rather than something that's wishy-washy.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, principles in writing, and then conversations to be noted, and explanations. Sorry, I think we're still having some connectivity issues today. I apologize to everyone for that. I'm sure it's at both our ends, Tosh, because my signal's sort of coming in and out as well. This is such an important topic as well. So what about during maternity leave? So we talked about pregnancy discrimination and rights around pregnancy. What about maternity leave? What are the rights of an employee, and how can an employer conduct themselves in that process?
So what I'd like to do, Meeta, and please tell me if I'm cutting in and out again, sorry, this is a bit of a struggle today, is talk about it in terms of 3 time periods. I think that's probably the most useful way that I can do it, and the easiest way that certainly for me, it helps that way, is the before. So before you go on maternity leave and you're pregnant, during maternity leave, and then after you come back from maternity leave. So let's look at those 3 periods of time, right? So the first thing an employer needs to know is that everybody from day 1 is entitled to maternity leave, okay, from day 1. That doesn't mean they're entitled to maternity pay. It means they're entitled to maternity leave, okay? I'll get into what that leave means in a minute.
Okay.
Say again?
No, I asked how much, but you will get there.
Yeah, got to get the delay. Yeah. So I'll get on to that very next thing. So to receive maternity pay, the employee needs to be there for at least 26 weeks. So 6 months employment, okay? And that 6 months employment, this is where it gets, lawyers have been overthinking these things. 6 months employment has to be by the 14th week before the baby is due. Okay, that's when they need to have acquired 6 months service. If you have, and it's an eligibility issue. It's not like if it's another reason to dismiss or whatever it is afterwards, that's irrelevant. Once you meet the criteria for maternity pay, you are owed maternity pay. End of story.
Yeah.
If you're made redundant afterwards, doesn't matter whether the job came to an end, you met the eligibility criteria, you are entitled to maternity pay, okay? And maternity pay, before I go to maternity pay, the employee has to take maternity leave when they give birth, obviously. So if they haven't booked it before, and there's something called compulsory maternity leave, 2 weeks from when the baby is born, okay?
So that means no matter what, they have to be off for 2 weeks. Oh, we've got a big delay today. Sorry, everyone. Josh, can you hear me? No, I think we're stuck today.
I can. Sorry, it sounds so choppy. What I'll do, Meeta, let me just have a quick. Let's try it. Because in the last call, can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah, I can now. It was a bit delayed. So let's talk about, you carry on talking. I'm not going to speak because otherwise we miss each other. So you carry on because you've got the knowledge.
This is terrible, isn't it? Okay, I'll fire through. Just put your hand up if I'm not sounding clear or anything, Meeta. Please let me know, okay? So they have to take maternity leave from when the baby's due, obviously, right? So if they haven't booked it before, or you didn't know you were pregnant and suddenly you give birth, you have to take at least 2 weeks from the date that the baby's born. The earliest you can take maternity leave is 11 weeks before the expected week of confinement, before the due date. 11 weeks, right? Maternity pay is up to, unless your contract gives more, is up to 39 weeks. The first 6 weeks is at 90% of your income, subject to a few other rules. And then the remaining 33 weeks is whatever the flat rate statutory maternity pay is. At the moment, it's about £400 or £500 a month. Okay. But the employee, so that's only 39 weeks it covers, but the employee is entitled to have 12 months off maternity leave. So the rest of that period is unpaid. Okay. So that's before and during.
Yeah.
Was there anything else? Does that make sense? Is there any questions you have about that?
It does make sense. The only thing I would bring up is that very often employees want to link a holiday to maternity. And so it's important that employers understand that once the baby's born, any time after that is maternity and not holiday. So if people do want to add holiday, they can add it before and after. And that year, if somebody chooses to take a full year, they actually accrue all benefits in that time. And I think it's really important to understand that that means that somebody will have accrued,
very, very important,
24 working days of holiday, which means which means that they could extend their maternity if you agree, or in the year that they return, they have double maternity allowance. That's just how it is. So I think sometimes
exactly right. From a practical point of view, it makes sense to get them take their holiday leave before they go. Otherwise, they come back and they end up taking 2 months off after they've been off a year. It's just another hit, isn't it?
Yeah. It's again something done in consultation and partnership, and I think that's we're doing a lot of advisory around maternity, not just for employers but employees, because again, a lot of problems arise by the language, the lack of consistent communication, the lack of feeling that we're on the same team. And I think that is ultimately the number one thing an employer can do to make somebody feel that they are their rights and their requests are being considered, is to always work towards a culture of inclusivity and belonging. And I think just reading again that 42% of women feel like there's a change in behavior when they're pregnant. Well, we do that in life. Someone's pregnant, we fuss over them, we make sure they get a seat, but we've got to make sure it's a positive shift. And we've got to check in with ourselves as employers, with teams, with managers. There's definitely work to be done there. So we are definitely advising a lot more on how to handle maternity processes, because it's not just laying down the law. It's about retaining that person when they get back. They can do keep in touch days. You can have the benefit of this person and they can get the benefit of their employer without it impacting the business as much as you might think it does if you plan it together effectively.
It's about taking a balanced view, is what you're really saying, Meeta, isn't it? It's weighing up all the different things, understanding, if I were in your shoes, taking the empathy and understanding what it is from that employee's perspective, which is why it's quite surprising. A lot of employers, they would have had children, and yet they don't necessarily seem to understand it, the personal aspects that are involved in it. So that's interesting.
Yeah, and empathy and understanding. Often people talk about when you've walked in someone's shoes, you can be more empathetic and supportive, but actually we obviously know half the population can't do that straight away. So it's about having the right tools and language in place. And as an employer or a manager, I think it's really important to think about what that is for you. And if it's not given to you by senior leadership, then make sure you've got something right. Check in with Tosh, check in with us to make sure that when, as and when it arises, you've got, the right tools to hand. Because another thing that happens is, pregnant employee A will tell non-pregnant employee B how badly they were treated. And then employee B and A leave. And all of a sudden, as an employer, you didn't see it coming. So again, thinking about the ramifications of not dealing with maternity rights properly, it's important it reflects who you are as an organization.
It's like a cancer that can spread if you don't get those things right, and it just goes all the way through the organization. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, and Deepika, I hope I said that right. Hi, Deepika, is asking a question around entitlements for pay rise. Can you touch on what entitlements are for pay rises during the maternity leave period? Very good question.
So the employee should not suffer any detriment as a result of being on maternity leave. So there were two things I was going to discuss, and one of the things I was going to discuss was that, Deepika, which is there's keeping in touch days whilst the employee is on leave, which means that they could even do the odd day's work here and there if we want to do that by arrangement, if that's something she wants to have. If there's a works do, or a get together, don't forget them. If there's a promotion, don't forget them. If they want to apply, they can apply. If there's reasons to say no, then there's reasons to say no. But just don't automatically exclude them. So when you say when there's a pay rise, if that's something that is across the board, then yes, they can't be treated less favourably as a result of it. Yeah. I suppose the tricky thing, Deepika, will be if it's related to commissions. And if the person is not earning commissions whilst they're on maternity leave because they're not working, well, if everybody else is getting a pay rise, you have to take a view on it. Because, again, is that person being treated less favourably because they're on maternity leave? Well, the only reason they're not getting it because they're on maternity leave. So that's where we start to get complicated. But in terms of pay rises, yes, they should receive it. The test is this. Would this have happened anyway, whether the person was on maternity? If the answer is it would have happened anyway, well, then it's got nothing to do with maternity.
Yeah.
If we're saying it wouldn't have, then the maternity influences it, doesn't it?
Yeah, and it doesn't actually affect the maternity pay that they get in that 39 weeks. It'll affect what they come back on.
Correct.
Yeah, good. Right, we have a question from Sarah. Sarah's asking, one of our employees has asked to work from home on a Wednesday as her son is having tutoring at 5, so would struggle to make it back in time. We need to set a precedent, but equally want to ensure we do the right thing. So how should Sarah approach that, Tosh?
I think you're saying set a precedent, and I think, Sarah, what you're worried about is it opens the floodgates to everybody suddenly wanting this. I'm not sure that they would necessarily want that. This is quite a specific scenario you've got there. It's to do with tutoring, isn't it? But everything has to be fact specific. If you're allowing this employee, Sarah, to do that, and the next one asks, and you can't reasonably accommodate that, and then they say, well, what about the other one? She got it. Well, presumably there were circumstances that allowed that to happen. So it doesn't mean that everybody suddenly gets it. Obviously, you just need to take a view on what can work, right? Yeah.
But you've got to be really careful there and not say, well, we gave it to her because she had a child, but you don't have a child, so we're not giving it to you, because that is a form of discrimination, right, Tosh?
Nope. You can't be discriminated against for not having a child. You can be discriminated against for having a child. For
very interesting.
Yeah, correct. So there wouldn't be any issue like that, but it might relate to obviously fairness.
Absolutely.
And relates to things like constructive dismissal and all those sorts of things. So we need to balance it. If I had 2 employees that both wanted, how long is the tutoring going for? Or what's the circumstances where it doesn't have to be at 5 o'clock? Is there something else that can work? What about the other person? Why do they want to work, change their hours? So it's just, it very much is fact sensitive about what the right thing to do is in each situation. So I hate giving those answers because I like to put my neck on the block. And depending on the circumstances. Yeah,
and what I would say as an employer is that we completely understand why this is important to you. Let's talk about, how we can make it a win-win where you are able to do what you need to do, but the business also isn't at a detriment for allowing you to do that. And then you start going through questions like, what is the work you do at the office versus home? And again, you as an employer will know what your policies are on that. But again, Tosh, we're talking about discrimination. We're talking about the football club that said, if no flexible working here, or however they put it. What if this organisation said, we do not support flexible working, and therefore it's a no? Is that discriminatory?
Without a doubt.
Everyone has a right to ask.
Yeah, exactly right. It's got to be reasonably considered. I'm not saying that employers can't do that. I'm saying that there are consequences. And in the consequences of the example we gave, the consequence was £185,000. There's nothing you can't do. You just understand what you're prepared to accept as a result of what actions you decide to take, right?
Okay. All right. We have another question from Deepika asking, do we calculate the statutory pay award after the pay period? Should we just talk quickly about how we calculate somebody's...
It's based on their income, 13 weeks up to the date that they take maternity leave.
13 weeks up to the date. So if they're taking the date from the 1st of September, you would look at the average of August, July and June. And you would have to include bonuses and commissions and everything in that.
Correct. I mean, there are more detailed calculations where there are variable hours. So you might look at an average over a 12-month period in certain circumstances. But generally, the pay period is for 13 weeks before they went on maternity leave.
Yeah. And that's statutory leave. Obviously, all employers have the right to pay an enhanced package. Can employers pay enhanced packages based on an individual, or does an enhanced package have to be across the board?
So the issue would be, why does one person get it and somebody else doesn't? So can they? Yes. What's the consequences? Well, if you were my employee, Meeta, and another lady employee was of mine, we're both having a baby and I give it to one, not the other, you're going to have some issues with that. And you might even have some constructive dismissal issues. Yeah. So the question will be, well, what is the reason for the difference in treatment?
Yeah.
Is there something that is justified in the circumstances that makes it fair and reasonable?
Yeah.
So that would be the requirement to explain why you're treating 2 people differently.
Very interesting. Tosh, we have gone a few minutes over time, but we wanted to answer the questions that were coming up towards the end. I also feel that we could continue for ages on this one, and we should, because it's so easy to get right and it's so easy to get wrong. But what would your closing advice be to everyone tuning in or watching the recording?
Well, we covered it earlier. So we did about the after the maternity period, about flexible working requests. We covered the 9 reasons to say no. We covered the situation where it's only once a year and there's no even right of appeal. Yeah. So we've covered the 3 periods. My advice in the situation is, is two things. Number one is speak to somebody like me. I know that sounds like that's a catch. It's not. Pick up the phone. I'll happily talk you through whatever there is, because it can be a minefield, right? If you don't want to, or you're reluctant to, I don't know, or whatever the reason you don't have a phone, then what do? Apply. Don't let your assumptions get in the way. Investigate what is or isn't possible. Listen, I guess the answer is, if you've ever read The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, Stephen Covey, he said, always seek to understand before you seek to be understood. So find out what they want. If it's a poker game, let them show their hand, see what you're dealing with, and then make a choice. Don't make a decision before you know what you're dealing with.
Very true. And if you forget that, remember, you've got 2 ears to listen and 1 mouth to talk. Well, I remind myself that.
Use them proportionately.
Working on listening skills is a huge skill for all managers and people leaders. And one of the things that I'm offering clients at the moment is to help them and their managers on how to handle maternity conversations. So again, this is probably something that we will start, do another session on. But just want to say thank you, Tosh. What an interesting and important topic. And thank you, everyone, for your input as well.
Yeah, thanks, Meeta. I mean, it is really interesting. And I'm surprised these things still happen this day and age, to be honest with you. So just watch out. Do the right thing. You won't go wrong.
No, indeed. And I'm just going to end the poll here, and you can all look for yourselves to what the results are. You should be seeing those results now. But understanding employee rights was the biggest challenge. So, don't be afraid of having a conversation. And, again, obviously reach out to Tosh or myself. But it's very straightforward. Work together. Remember, you're on the same team. And right solutions should prevail.
And I want to say, look, I'm sorry about the patchy connection today. It looks like it was on my end, so hands up. I fully apologize. If you missed anything in here and the replay, if you're watching the replay or even just watching this now, call us. Please pick up the phone. Our contact details. If you've got the details of this webinar, you'll have our contact details, and we'll happily address whatever questions you've got at all. Okay.
Indeed. If you have, scenarios that you didn't want to share in public, Tosh and I can walk you through those, and there's no charge. That's not why we do this. We do this to keep our network really well appraised and successful in their working world. So, okay, we've gone well over now, so I'll stop talking. Yeah. Thank you for seeing you and everyone at 11 a.m. next Thursday.
See you next week. Thanks, Meeta. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.